I used to believe betrayal was something loud, a scream, a slammed door, a broken glass on the floor. But when it came for me, it arrived quietly, like fog rolling through an open window at dawn. Soft enough to be ignored until you were already lost in it. My name's Michael Hale. I'm 39, and for most of my life, I thought I was a good man. Not perfect. I've lied. I've kept secrets. I've made compromises like everyone else, but I believed I'd earned my peace. Married 15 years. A modest consulting firm. A townhouse in Seattle with too many bookshelves and not enough sunlight. And a wife I trusted more than I trusted my own instincts. Her name is Emily. She's the kind of woman whose silence fills a room. Not cold, not cruel, just contained. I always told people she was steady. I think that's what I loved most about her, her ability to stay calm when I couldn't. But now looking back, I realize calm isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of someone hiding. The first hint came on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was grocery night. I'd stopped by the store after work, picked up the usual salmon, spinach, her favorite dark chocolate. When I got home, she was already in the kitchen, phone face down on the counter, her hand hovering near it like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "Hey," I said, trying to read her eyes. "Hey," she smiled too quickly. "You're early." Her phone buzzed once, a soft, private vibration, and she flinched. That was the moment. Not a confession, not a fight, just a flinch, small, sharp, almost invisible. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next few days were filled with ghosts. She was different in ways only someone in love for too long could notice. Her perfume stronger, her phone always with her, laughter that didn't reach her eyes. When she told me she was meeting the girls for dinner on Saturday, I nodded, but my chest tightened. After she left, I sat in the dark for an hour, thinking about how pathetic it would be to check, to follow, to confirm. But curiosity is a disease, and once it bites, you either let it consume you or you amputate the part of yourself it infects. I didn't amputate. I drove to the restaurant she'd mentioned, a popular downtown spot, always packed. Her car wasn't there. For 20 minutes, I circled the block like a fool, convincing myself maybe she parked somewhere else. Then I saw her, not with her friends, but with a man, tall, clean-cut, maybe early 40s. They stood too close. She laughed like she hadn't in months. He touched her wrist, not her hand, not her shoulder, but the inside of her wrist, the most intimate casual gesture a man can make when he already knows what your skin feels like. I felt something break in me, not rage, not sadness. Something colder, something that whispered, "You don't know her anymore." I didn't confront her that night. I went home, waited. She came in late, smelling faintly of whiskey and someone else's cologne. I pretended to be asleep. She pretended I was fooled. That's when I started writing things down, times, places, patterns. I didn't know why. Maybe because writing made it real. Maybe because some part of me wanted to understand before I burned it all down. Over the next weeks, the story unfolded like a slow, deliberate crime. Lunch breaks that lasted too long. Weekend errands that turned into 4-hour disappearances. A second phone hidden in her desk drawer. Every discovery felt like pulling teeth from my own mouth, one by one, until I was left bleeding and smiling in the mirror like a madman who still wanted to believe his reflection. I hired a private investigator. That was the point of no return. His name was Harris, an ex-cop who smelled like cigarettes and tired marriages. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, took the photos I gave him, and said, "You'll have what you need in 3 days. 3 days later, he handed me a file thick enough to make me wish I'd never opened it. Inside, pictures of Emily and the man, hotels, dinners, parking lots, the hollow intimacy of routine infidelity. The man's name was Dr. Thomas Reed, a cardiologist, married, 2 kids, and, as Harris told me, someone with connections, the kind of connections that made people careful. That night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of bourbon and watched the city lights blur into a mess of gold and gray. 15 years. Every memory, every touch, every laugh, it all felt contaminated now. But what haunted me most wasn't the affair. It was the question beneath it. Why him? Why now? People cheat for reasons: loneliness, attention, thrill. But Emily wasn't reckless. She was deliberate. If she was risking everything, there had to be more beneath the surface. Something bigger. And I couldn't stop until I found out what it was. The next morning, I told Harris I wanted to dig deeper, not into her, but into him. Something in his expression shifted. You sure you want to go down that road, Mr. Hale? Once you start, it's not about the affair anymore. It's about what you'll do when you find out. I nodded, because I already knew the answer. I wasn't looking for peace anymore. I was looking for purpose. And revenge, when you've got nothing left to lose, feels an awful lot like purpose. 3 days after I found out his name, I started studying him the way he studied hearts. Dr. Thomas Reed, 42 years old, cardiologist at Westbrook Medical Center, married to a woman named Julia with 2 kids in private school. His life on paper was the picture of stability. But I knew better now. Paper lies. People lied. I spent hours watching him. Harris had given me everything: his schedule, his favorite cafe, even his jogging route along the lake every morning at 6:30 a.m. It's strange how fast obsession becomes routine. By the end of the first week, I knew what brand of protein bar he ate, how he tapped his fingers against his steering wheel when he thought no one was looking, and that he called someone named G almost every night around 10 p.m. G wasn't his wife. His wife, Julia, had a different ringtone, one he often ignored. But every time G appeared on his phone, his voice softened. And when I heard Emily's laugh on the other end of one of those calls, through a cracked Bluetooth signal that Harris had tapped, my stomach dropped. She wasn't just his lover. She was his weakness. I thought that would be the end of it. Proof enough. But something Harris said stuck with me. Your guy isn't just sleeping around, Hal, he muttered, handing me a cigarette I didn't take. He's into something else. Money, probably. Medical fraud. I've seen that type before: fancy suits, expensive watches, too much confidence for what their salary can explain. That sentence changed everything. See, until then, my anger was personal. About the betrayal, the humiliation. But when Harris said money, I realized this wasn't just about Emily and Reed. There was something bigger hiding under there. Affair. Something that smelled like corruption. So I started digging where I shouldn't. Reed had access to patient data, insurance files, research grants, all things that can make a smart man rich and a greedy man powerful. With Harris's help, I found a side company registered under Reed's name, Trinity Biomedical Solutions, listed as a consultancy but with zero public activity. Its funding came from a series of shell accounts, one of which was linked to a charity Emily had organized 2 years ago. My wife's charity. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I found her signature, her actual signature, on a wire transfer authorization for $120,000 from that charity to Trinity Biomedical. It hit me like a car crash. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was helping him move money. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my office, the files spread out like puzzle pieces of a life I didn't recognize anymore. Emily, my wife, my calm, quiet, steady Emily, was part of something criminal. And she didn't even try to hide it. The next morning, I decided to confront her. Not about the affair. Not yet. About the money. I waited until after dinner, when she was sitting at the table scrolling through her phone. I said softly, why did your charity send money to Trinity Biomedical? Her face froze. She didn't blink. What? I repeated the question. She swallowed hard. Where did you hear that? I found the records. Your signatures on the transfer. So tell me, what kind of charity helps a for-profit company hide cash? For a moment, I saw something flicker behind her eyes: fear, guilt, calculation. Then she laughed. A dry, brittle sound. You've been checking up on me. Answer the question. It was a grant, she said quickly. Thomas, Dr. Reed, was helping us with a medical outreach project. It's all above board. Then show me the documents. I don't have them here. Of course you don't. Her expression hardened. You're out of line, Michael. You've been paranoid for months. You're imagining things that aren't there. It was the oldest defense in the book. Turn the accuser into the unstable one. But I didn't argue. I just looked at her, memorized the face of the woman who could lie that effortlessly, and said quietly, I hope he's worth it. Then I left the house before I could break something. That night, I slept in my car. The rain hit the windshield like a metronome for bad decisions. I kept replaying every conversation, every dinner, every smile. The signs were always there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. By morning, I had a plan. If Emily and Reed were laundering money through her charity, there would be evidence, emails, records, transactions. And since Emily used our shared home computer for most of her work, I knew where to look. I waited until she left for her yoga class, then went into her office. Her laptop was password protected, but I'd lived with her long enough to know she reused the same 3 passwords. The second one worked. Within minutes, I was staring at a digital trail that made my blood run cold. There were encrypted files, invoices, reports, transaction logs, all linked to Trinity Biomedical. But what really caught my eye was a folder named Halstead. When I opened it, I found scanned contracts, research papers, and internal memos from a pharmaceutical company I'd never heard of. At the bottom of one memo was a name I did know, Dr. Thomas Reed, and right beneath it, Emily Hale, her title, consultant, Project Halstead. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was working for him. That's when everything clicked. Reed wasn't just a doctor running side hustles. He was coordinating something illegal, experimental drug testing maybe, or insurance fraud, using Emily's charity to move money quietly. And she wasn't an innocent bystander. She was a partner. That realization didn't break me. It focused me. I copied everything to a flash drive, wiped the search history, and left the house before she got home. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear, cold, determined. That evening, Harris called me. Got something for you, he said. You're not gonna like it. He sent a photo, grainy, taken from a distance. Emily and Reed again, but this time not in a restaurant. They were standing beside a car. Reed was handing her a small black case. She opened it, looked inside, then kissed him. And on the back of the car, faint but visible, was the logo of Halstead Pharmaceuticals. That night, as the city lights blurred outside my window, I realized this wasn't a story about infidelity anymore. It was about betrayal on every possible level. Love, trust, law, morality. Emily thought she could play both sides. She thought she could hide behind her calm voice and half-truths. But she forgot who she married. I build systems for a living. I see patterns, weak spots, leverage points. And now I had one goal, to take her world apart piece by piece, just like she'd done to mine. There's a moment in every plan where you realize you've stopped being a person and become a problem solver. The grief recedes. The grief is replaced by diagrams and contingencies, and a list of things that must be done in a specific order. That was me after I copied every file off Emily's laptop and watched the rain smear the city into something unreadable. I had become, in the bluntest sense, methodical. First rule, don't act from heat. The man who burns the house down because he's angry leaves no structure behind to rebuild anything from. So I slept in my car 2 nights in a row. I ate cold sandwiches. I practiced speaking in a voice that felt foreign, flat, unemotional. I rehearsed lies I might have to tell and truths I could not. Second rule, make yourself inevitable. If you are a force someone has to reckon with, they will eventually reveal themselves. People with secrets are not good at long, slow pressure. They'll crack. So you don't shout, you leak. You place a seed that, over time, will grow roots and then topple the whole tree. Third rule, protect the soft things. Claire, no, Emily was soft in a way I couldn't afford to ignore. Part of me still wanted to hurt her until she understood. Part of me wanted to save whatever small human remained under the armor. Those halves sat across from each other and never made peace. I chose the practical thing. I made sure she couldn't be used as a pawn while I moved against Reed and Halstead. I began by moving the flash drive into places she could not trace, an encrypted drop, a third-party lawyer in a city 3 states away, and, as a last resort, a copy with a reporter I'd once helped with background checks. The old favors repay themselves at odd hours. I created the architecture of the plan on paper first, a crude flowchart. Files gives leak points, gives legal pressure, gives public exposure, gives investigation. Each arrow had contingencies. For instance, leak points had 3 nodes: local investigative reporter, a national watchdog outlet, and an anonymous leak to a federal tip line with a time release of documents if nothing happened in 72 hours. I had seen corporations die under smaller, more specific pressure. The trick was to force multiple authorities to care at the same time so they couldn't quietly bury it. I started with work. Reed was a creature of routine hospital rounds, charity appearances, a favorite bar where he drank whiskey while reading journals. He split his days into public and private. My first move was to make his private life slightly less private. I hired someone to follow him, not a heavy surveillance team, just a quiet observer who could photograph him exchanging envelopes or meeting discreetly with men in suits. Harris deployed a woman who knew how to be invisible in the presence of arrogance. The first week produced a photograph of Reed leaving the hospital with a mid-level administrator, both looking anxious, and a grainy frame of him slipping a flash drive into the glove box of his car behind a grocery store. It wasn't proof enough for a prosecutor, but it was enough to make men like Reed look over their shoulder. Next, I worked the charity angle. Emily's nonprofit had donors and board members who, when reminded of their legal exposure, got twitchy. A quiet call to one of the board's wealthier members, a man who still took pride in doing the right thing publicly, produced immediate leverage. I didn't threaten him. I simply laid out the possibility that the charity's funds had been diverted through Trinity and into Halstead. I painted the picture cleanly: audits, subpoenas, reputational collapse. He disappeared from the charity's social calendar within a week. People leaving is a symptom that often accelerates collapse. It suggests there's rot in the center. I fed small, precise pieces of the puzzle to reporters, not the whole dossier. That would be flashy and easy to counter, but targeted items that corresponded to public facts. A wire from Charity X to Trinity, a scanned copy of a memo mentioning Project Halstead, a receipt that placed Reed at a lab he'd claimed not to have visited. Each piece forced them to ask questions of the institutions involved, and the institutions responded by opening quiet internal reviews. Internal reviews are slow-acting poison to people who rely on the speed of silence. I never spoke to the press. I let the cunning of the leaks do that. I wanted the rupture to look like it came from multiple sources, not some vindictive husband. There was, of course, the human calculus. Revenge is rarely pure math. It's contaminated by anger, memory, embarrassment. When I watched the photo Harris had taken of Emily accepting the black case from Reed, I felt sick in a way I didn't expect. Not because of the sex, but because of the domesticity of it, the everyday transference of trust packaged as paperwork. That image lodged like a splinter, she handing over a thing small enough to fit into hands, and maybe large enough to ruin someone's life. I called my mother then. The choice startled me more than the act. She answered on the second ring, voice creased with sleep. I lied. I told her I was traveling for work, a different city, a different life. She wished me well. It was a reminder that some parts of your life remain untouched by the dirt under your fingernails. Keep those anchors, I thought. You'll need them when the world tilts. But the architecture of the plan required human bait. Reed needed to be forced into a reaction. So I engineered a small, controlled leak to his wife. Emily had confided in Julia in private messages that the charity's cash flow had been messy lately and that Reed was under pressure to balance accounts. I forwarded an edited packet, a single email chain, and a scanned wire transfer anonymously to Julia with a short note. "You deserve to know." She called him that evening, voice brittle. I listened from a distance as he attempted explanations that sounded unsteady. The conversation ended with a slammed phone and a wave of anger that did not belong to me but felt like wind pushing a house of cards. Then came the night Reed came to us. Or rather, he came to our neighborhood bar, a place where I often drank alone after late nights. He arrived in a threadbare suit and the look of a man who hadn't slept. He was in morgue. I could see the seams. I let him approach me because I wanted him to show his face, to reveal the man behind the arrogance. "Michael," he said, smiling with the practiced charm of a man who believes smiles can be armor. "Tough week, you've been busy," I replied. The bar's chatter provided cover. "I hear your schedule's been complicated." He laughed too easily. "I don't know what you think you know, Hale." His hand on the whiskey glass trembled. He was bluffing, and not very well. "You should leave this alone." "You think I'm stupid?" I asked. "You think I don't know how the ledger looks?" I let the notebook in my coat so slightly, the corner visible, an ancient trick to imply documentation. He leaned in. "If you bring this sort of thing up publicly, you'll destroy more than your marriage. Think about that." I watched the lie begin, and then at the very instant he was about to lean into the threat, a man at the bar snapped a photo of us, a casual social post. "Really?" And tagged a local reporter who tracked medical industry scandals. I didn't plan that man's arm. I didn't need to. The universe arranges its own coincidences when the pressure is right. Within 48 hours, Reed's department got an internal notice. Within a week, Halstead's procurement officers fielded questions about an unusual invoice. The public cracks began as whispers. But as any architect of ruin knows, whispers become avalanches when you pry the right boulder loose. And yet, not everything followed the script. The pressure had a cost. Emily withdrew from public life suddenly. She canceled speaking engagements, avoided calls, and at night I could hear her moving through the rooms like a ghost trying to remember where the light switches were. Once, in the laundromat, we stood side by side without touching, and I watched her fold a towel with hands that looked like they had been scalded. She met my eye briefly, and the look was a savage, apologetic thing. "You could stop," she said, voice so small it could have been the spin of a dryer. "Just stop. Leave it alone. Stop." I repeated. The simple question revealed the fissure between us. "You pick a life, Emily. You chose people who laundered money. You signed transfers with your name on them. You stepped into a steam and then looked surprised it had rules." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked away and left a receipt on the table, a coffee shop napkin with a name and a number written on it in the hand I thought I recognized. For a second, I imagined this was a trail and not a trap. Curiosity keeps men balanced on tightropes. I picked up the napkin like it was a clue and not a confession. As the weeks blurred, the net tightened. Reed was suspended pending an inquiry. Halstead issued a bland statement about compliance reviews. Charity donors demanded audits. And then, the night before the first formal subpoena arrived, Reed called me. We spoke quietly, and whatever arrogance he'd had months before had been replaced with a raw edge of panic. "You can stop this," he said. "There's still a line. Don't drag people who don't deserve it." "Who doesn't deserve it?" I asked. "The people whose names are on your memos. The developers who paid you. The bureaucrats who took the checks." He didn't answer. He told me instead that there were others, deeper people with thinner smiles. That Halstead had contractors who could ruin men and reputations simply by whispering to the right people. That taking them down might mean taking blows I couldn't imagine. I believed him because the world had taught me to trust evidence, and his story matched the pattern of people who are desperate. But I also suspected he lied to try and save his own skin. Desperation makes people clever. It also makes them deceitful. So I didn't stop. I accelerated. I published one small packet of documents to an anonymous tip line and watched the reaction in real time. Emails lit up, rumors stirred, and within days investigators, not the PR type, but people with badges, started asking questions. With government curiosity came legal heft, and with legal heft came a protection that was ugly but useful. Once the feds are involved, the telephone games slow down. That muted the immediate risk to Emily. It didn't erase it. On the morning Reed was arrested, I found Emily in our kitchen crying into her hands. There's a particular grief in the sound of someone who's lost a map. It's not about the guilt. It's the loss of orientation. She looked at me as if asking why I'd made that choice. For a second, something in me wanted to say for you. But that would have been dishonest. I did it for me to reclaim a life I thought I'd been building honestly. If that sounds petty or small, it's true. Revenge has a small, precise logic. When the handcuffs clicked on him, and later, when his name splashed across the morning headlines, I felt a relief so sharp it almost numbed me. The legal machine went to work. Housestead scrubbed, lawyers circled, donations shifted. Emily entered a long, quiet period where she cooperated intermittently. Sometimes she told me things that made me more furious. Other times she looked like a woman trying to salvage dignity from the wreckage. But the human cost kept increasing. People I'd liked at the charity lost their jobs. Patients of the cardiology clinic whispered when I walked past them. My reputation, too, dented by the public spectacle of my private life, was in tatters. I had the thing I'd wanted: proof, exposure, a kind of cold, tidy justice. But it lay like a carcass on the floor with other remains on it. There's no crescendo in real life. No neat final scene where you look into the camera. The aftermath is bureaucratic. Subpoenas, defense teams, hearings. You learn the names of lawyers you will curse for the rest of your life and the names of investigators you will quietly thank. You discover that the truth opens other doors you didn't know were there, and that each door leads to a new ledger. New debts. At the center of the ledger was Emily, both the reason I'd started and the cost of finishing. As I sat in an empty office after the arrest started, my phone buzzed with a message I almost didn't open. It was from her. I'm sorry. No justification, no plea, no request. Just those two small words that carry a continent of meaning. I stared at them until the screen dimmed. Then I closed the laptop, rolled the sleeves of my shirt, and began preparing for the next phase. Because I now understood something cold and simple. Exposing one crooked doctor and one shadowy firm was a beginning, not an end. For every Housestead you unmask, 10 more patterns exist, humming quietly behind polite facades. The detective's work never stops. The revenge, once lit, is a flame that finds more wood, and I would follow the smoke wherever it led. There's a particular stomach-sinking clarity that comes when you realize the thing you're fighting isn't a man, it's a system. A system has rhythm, redundancy, people who trade favors like currency, and smiles like armor. You can break a man. Breaking the system is an act of patient violence. After Reed's arrest, the easy targets scattered. Petty fixers, a couple of complicit administrators, the charity treasurer who'd taken payments without reading them. They were small fish, and their splashes made noise but didn't topple foundations. The noise brought investigators, true federal agents with clipped voices and an appetite for documents. That was useful. It was also a problem. Once the feds were involved, the scope widened and the actors did too. Men in darker suits started using very soft voices on very loud phones. The camouflaged reach of Housestead, I learned, stretched into places I'd assumed were clean. I used to think patience was a private thing. Now I knew it's a weapon you shape into a trap. You press slowly at soft spots until something gives. I had leverage. The files, the flash drives, the reporters on staggered timers. What I didn't have was insulation. I'd burned a lot of favors getting here, and there were people who'd been paid to forget things who suddenly remembered how to be useful. They came in layers. First, the legal team, a glossy man who introduced himself as a consultant and offered practical options to settle things quietly for the charity. He smiled like a man who had never signed his name without checking the wind. I listened. He offered money, plausible deniability, an apology draft. He assumed purchase was still possible. I thanked him and let him slide back into the parquet, his shoes whispering like a threat. Next came the calls at night, numbers that showed up as unknown. Voices that said things like, "Don't make this personal, Hale, and you're smart enough to know what happens to men who light fires." Threats had changed from subtle to literal. Someone left a white envelope on my porch with a photograph of Reed's broken wrist and a single line scrawled across the back, "Stop poking the hive." They wanted me to feel visibility as a danger. Visibility is a strange thing. It protects, and it exposes. The more light I let into Halstead's corners, the more men who'd existed in shadows had to show their faces. Those faces were uglier than I imagined. They were calm and practiced at the small cruelties of power, the kind of men who could order staff to lose a file or misplace a recorder with a sigh. They believed the system would hold. They had lawyers. They had friends on boards. They had reputations stacked like bricks to be offered as collateral. In this phase, the work turned less detective and more political. You don't just show a file and expect an institution to fall. Institutions have muscle memory. They close ranks. They call PR. They hire teams to stitch explanations together and bury the people who made the noise. So I learned to play their game on a different field. I turned pieces of evidence into puzzles that demanded answers from multiple, independent actors at the same time. One document released to a watchdog, another to a congressman's aide, another to a reporter who specialized in watchdog exposes. Once all three started asking questions publicly and privately, the pressure could no longer be diverted by a single graceful apology. That's where the teeth of the network revealed themselves. A project executive at Halstead, a man named Calder, answered to silence. His name appeared in procurement memos, and when I pushed public pressure his way, his response was surgical. My car was keyed overnight. My office front desk got a call about a noise complaint that ended up involving a city inspector and a paperwork audit that took days. Most frighteningly, the widow of a small-town developer who had testified quietly against Halstead was found dead in a house fire declared accidental. Coincidence? Maybe. The pattern of coincidences was becoming a map. The feds moved slowly, the way glaciers do. They called me in repeatedly, asked the same questions, verified the same dates, and then sat on their answers while their legal processes chewed through paper. Patience helps me, but their tempo is dictated by prosecutors' calculus and political appetite, not righteousness. I learned to use the slowness. I leaked a transactional chain to a local newspaper's oversight column timed to coincide with a federal subpoena to a different jurisdiction. The papers printed the questions before the men could craft the denials. The denials looked thin next to the ledgers. That won us momentum, but it also revealed our blunter vulnerability. People with bills, people with families, people who fold when the system applies pressure in places the law doesn't watch. One of the charity's board members, the one with the soft conscience, took a call in a dusty parking lot from a man who identified himself as someone who could be very useful. He was told, quietly, that if he continued to cooperate his son would lose a scholarship. He relented. He repented. He became a non-player. The lesson is ugly and simple. Systems don't collapse only from outside pressure. They survive by co-opting survival instincts. They buy silence with fear, and fear is a superior currency. I started keeping a list of the names they used to threaten me. Not just the men with suits, the wives' names, the children, the scholarships. I thought of all the collateral that had nothing to do with any crime, and everything to do with leverage. How many people could they hurt with a single phone call? Too many. I learned softness is a weakness the powerful love to exploit. So I hardened what I could. I built redundancies, more copies of files outside legal reach, escrowed to foreign servers, and trusted lawyers with reputations they couldn't buy. I pushed more into public record in small doses, enough to force inquiries, but not so much as to let Halstead's PR machinery frame the narrative. When the lies started, I had receipts, physical, time-stamped, verifiable. At the same time, I kept an eye on Emily. She had become an unmoored person, fragile as thin ice. Once, I found her at a gas station at 2 a.m., hair in a messy knot, eyes hollow. She looked at me like someone who'd been seeing ghosts for so long she wasn't sure which were real. They told me if I talked, everything would get worse, she said, as if she had been rehearsing guilt. She wanted to run. She wanted to apologize. She wanted me to forgive her. I couldn't give her what she wanted because forgiveness felt like acceptance of what she'd allowed. I gave her something else, a way out. I told her to keep quiet and cooperate, to tell the truth when asked, to sign whatever legal documents kept her from being sent into shrinking rooms with men in suits and bad humor. She did, reluctantly, fearfully, honestly. The network retaliated with escalation. A man followed me for 3 days with a camera. Packages with no return addresses arrived at my building. Seeds of worry. Someone leaked a photo of me getting coffee at a shop where a senator I'd tracked once had a meeting. The implication wasn't direct, but the whisper was, "You're not a clean man either." The goal wasn't to prove I'd done wrong. It was to make me feel dirtied. The tactic worked, an uglier psychological trick. When a person feels unclean, they flinch when they should strike. Then came the thing I didn't expect, a clean human casualty. Harris, the ex-cop who smelled of cigarettes and regret and had been my scaffolding, disappeared for 48 hours. For 2 days I could not find him. His phone went to voicemail. He didn't answer messages. I knew why long before the call came. He'd been taken for a talk. When he called back, voice clipped, and lo, he said, "You've poked a hornet's nest." He'd been warned. He was shaken to the bone. He quit. "I'm done," he said. "I don't want to be the reason anyone gets hurt." And he meant it. He left town the next day. Harris walking away felt like a body part amputated, useful, alive, and suddenly gone. There are 2 ways a man can respond to bleeding teens. 1, he folds. 2, he adapts. I adapted. I started recruiting differently. Not more muscle, but more invisibility. People who owed tiny debts, a librarian who had once been helped with a parking ticket, a barista who'd been given cash for a missed rent payment, people who, when asked, would sit at a booth and notice a face and report it later. I found a coder who could bury breadcrumbs in places Halstead wouldn't look for them. I found a lawyer who still had a conscience. He didn't have influence, just a quiet willingness to file the right paperwork at the right time. We started to use the network's own rules against it. Halstead moved money through a set of shell companies with predictable naming conventions. Once you knew the pattern, those patterns yielded other patterns. A fake contract in one state mirrored another in a different agency. A consultancy named Argent in one document had a sister company with the same accountant in a different filing. The law is a blunt instrument, but it has teeth when you feed it enough of the right facts. I fed it. The turning point came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, bureaucratic hammer. An investigator in the federal office in our city, called in by the press noise and the leaks, had the patience to follow to small leads I'd left like pebbles across a path. He subpoenaed a server in a Midwest development firm and found thinned ledgers that connected to Halstead's offshore accounts. That subpoena was the hinge. Once a judge signed, lawyers on both sides scrambled to adjust. The net closed in on a man called Calder, and then on Sloan. Names that once sat above lunch menus in country clubs now started to have criminal appendices. When Calder's house was searched at dawn, his wife wept for him on the front steps. She told a camera, broken and human, that he'd made mistakes but worked hard. You see the theater of regret they put on when the curtains start to fall. It's a practice thing. Humility at the end, deflection in the middle, denial at the start. The system had its rituals. I thought then, briefly, that this might be enough. The arrests would remove pieces. The indictments would take months to play out. Halstead would be bruised and locally unpopular. But systems have memory. They rebuild. The men who ran them had ways to fade into consulting, to sell assets, to shuffle money through places lawyers can't touch. Exposing them was not the same as tearing out the roots. It was just making some parts visible to sunlight. I paid for it with sleep and relationships. People I liked lost gigs. Donors at the charity were publicly shamed. The patients of Reed and others were angry. My reputation was a fractured thing, a man who'd snooped, who'd marred other people's lives in seeking truth. Some called me a fool. Some called me a hero. Neither title fit. I was something in between. Someone who'd rearranged the furniture and watched the house look different. At the end of one long week of hearings and interviews and bad coffee, I walked home to an empty kitchen and saw a small envelope on the table. Inside, a Polaroid. Emily standing on a small porch in another state, hand in a stranger's. No note, no plea, just a photograph like a proof of life. She'd sent it, or someone had. I kept it and put it under a stack of papers. The feeling it gave me was not victory. It was a small, murky relief. She was alive. For now, the network still breathed. It had teeth that could gnaw at people who dared to bite back. But it also had weaknesses: lawyers who hated risk, accountants who liked simple math, children who wanted scholarships, senators with reputations to lose. You apply pressure at the seams and systems start to leak out. There was one thing left to do that I'd avoided because doing it meant moving from exposure to an act that could not be undone. I had to look at my own ledger and decide how much of myself I was willing to trade for the last piece of the truth. Systems are cruel in their self-preservation. They make you pay a toll for every inch you claim. On the table beside my laptop, another anonymous email blinked. 2 men will come to see you tonight. Tell them yes, and you survive. Tell them no, and you die quietly with a reputation as a fool. It was not a threat so much as an offer. I poured bourbon and didn't answer immediately. The night outside was the color of spent coin. I thought of Harris and his cigarettes and the way he'd left. I thought of the old men who'd been named in testimonies and the way their faces had looked small in court photos. I thought of Emily's Polaroid, the paper thinness of her existence now in a life that had been rearranged. Decisions come not as explosions, but as quiet presses of the thumb. You can flinch, or you can press. I typed an answer. No, I won't meet them. If they want to talk, let them speak to the congressman's office and the agents on the file. I've already told their names to people who will notice if anything happens to me. Then I hit send and walked to the window and watched the city breathe. The network still had teeth, but tonight at least I had a voice that was out in the open. There was a faint sound, a car door, distant and careful. I didn't move. I knew they were out there, listening for me to do something stupid. They liked men to be predictable. They hated surprises. Tomorrow, I would go to the hearing. I would sit in a sterile room and tell the truth in a way the law could use. I would hand over the ledger I'd kept of names and dates and show the pattern I'd traced with hands that had been shaking for months. And when I left that hearing, whether scarred or vindicated, whether bloodied or applauded, I knew this: a system that eats people alive will not die easily. It will wound, it will pay, and it will find new ways to survive. But it can be made to stumble. And to stumble is where the rest of the story begins. It's been 16 months since the hearings ended. Long enough for the news cycle to move on. Long enough for strangers to stop recognizing my name in grocery store lines, but not long enough for the silence in my head to settle. I still wake up at 3:12 a.m. most nights. Same time, every night. No alarms, no nightmares. just the echo of a noise that isn't there, like the memory of something that once mattered. The first few weeks after the indictments, I told myself I'd rest, take time, maybe move. But rest is a myth when your story's been turned into evidence. There's always one more follow-up call, one more clarification, one more off-the-record conversation with a man whose badge you don't quite trust. They said I'd done a service. They said I'd help restore accountability. Funny how the language of gratitude sounds like paperwork. Halstead didn't die. It never really would. The company changed its name, appointed a new board, and rebranded with slogans about integrity and fresh vision. The old executives took consulting jobs overseas or disappeared behind shell companies. The ones who stayed behind became experts in denial. Dr. Thomas Reed, the man who'd started it all, my wife's lover, the rock beneath my marriage, is still in prison. 8 years for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. The newspapers called it white-collar justice. 8 years for a decade of crimes. 8 years for shattering a life. He'll probably serve 5 with good behavior. He'll walk out, gray and quieter, but intact. I've learned that some people don't change, they just wait. Emily never testified. She cooperated with written statements, quietly through lawyers. Then, one morning, she vanished again, this time legally. New name, new city. Somewhere in the Midwest, if the postal forwarding notice I intercepted was right. I used to think I'd hunt her down, not to hurt her, not anymore, but to understand. Now, I don't think understanding changes anything. Closure's a word people use when they've run out of fight. I don't want closure. I want quiet. After everything burned, I stayed in Seattle. The house was too empty, too haunted, so I sold it and moved downtown, smaller place, higher floor, less to lose. From my balcony, I can see the water. On clear days, when the sun cuts across the sound, it almost feels like forgiveness. I started consulting again, just not the same kind. I helped small firms audit for corruption risks. Ironic, isn't it? The man who learned betrayal from the inside now teaching others how to spot it before it festers. They pay well. I don't talk about my past. They know, of course, everyone Googles. But they pretend not to, and I pretend it doesn't matter. That's the modern truce, selective blindness. Last week, I got a letter. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, grainy, slightly bent. Emily again, standing on a pier this time, wind pushing her hair into her face. Beside her, a boy maybe 10. My gut clenched before my brain caught up. No note, no explanation. Just that image. Was the boy hers? Ours? Impossible. But the math whispered otherwise. I stared at it for an hour, then put it away. Because some ghosts don't haunt you to be remembered. They haunt you to make sure you never stop questioning what's real. Sometimes I drive out past the edge of the city, where the lights fade and the road hums beneath the tires. I stop at a 24-hour diner, the kind where the waitresses don't ask questions, and the coffee tastes like burnt honesty. I sit, order pie I never eat, and think about Harris. He never came back. I like to imagine he's somewhere warmer, watching the ocean, cigarette between his fingers. Finally UNBOTHERED. We both paid our prices. Mine was isolation. His was disappearance. Emily's was regret. Reed's was confinement. Halstead's a rebrand. The universe isn't fair, but it's consistent. They once asked me, a reporter, young, nervous, trembling with idealism, if I thought revenge had been worth it. I told him no. Then I paused. Then I said yes, because revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't fill the empty space, but it stops the bleeding long enough for the scar to form. And sometimes that's enough. He didn't print that line. Maybe it was too ugly for print, but it's the truth. Some nights I write again. Not reports, not ledgers, just memories, pieces of what happened, written in notebooks I'll never publish. Maybe someday someone will find them and think I was crazy. Maybe they'll see the pattern, how betrayal leads to obsession, obsession to discovery, Discovery to destruction. And maybe they'll understand the one thing I learned too late. Every secret has an ecosystem. If you dig long enough, you'll find out what it feeds on, and sometimes it's you. Last night before sleep, I went out onto the balcony. The city was quiet. A thin layer of fog curled around the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a ship horn echoed deep and lonely. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. Just stillness. Maybe that's what peace actually is. Not joy, not redemption. Just the absence of noise. I lit a cigarette I didn't want and whispered to the dark, "I forgive you, Emily." Then, after a long pause, "I forgive me, too." The ember glowed, then died, and I watched the smoke fade into the same night that had swallowed everything else.